It was a quiet, golden afternoon along Route 66, the kind of day when sunlight kissed cracked asphalt and the air carried the familiar scent of gasoline, dust, and cheap coffee. Inside a small, worn-out diner on the road, Emily Carter, a 22-year-old waitress with tired eyes but with a heart full of hope, moved from table to table in fluid actions. She smiled at strangers, refilled cups, and greeted every soul with warmth. Life hadn't given her much, but what she did have, she gave freely: kindness, respect, and the kind of sincerity which made even the loneliest of travelers feel seen. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and standing up for what's right, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Real Kindness Story. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this remind us, no matter where we are, humanity still exists. Life wasn't easy for Emily. She worked endless shifts trying to pay for her father's medical treatment. Yet, no matter how exhausted she was, she never lost her light. The locals adored her, especially a group of men most people feared, the Hell's Angels. They came often, parking their roaring Harleys outside the diner, their presence enough to make anyone else nervous. But not Emily. She treated them like any other customer, with kindness, dignity, and a smile. And for that, they respected her like family. To them, Emily wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who saw the good in people long after the world had stopped trying. On this particular day, as Emily poured coffee for one of the bikers, the usual din of roaring motorcycles was drowned out by something sharper: expensive tires. A convoy of sleek black SUVs rolled to a stop outside the diner. In a moment, giggles could be heard through the door. A bunch of wealthy teenagers walked in, boisterous, snobbish, and dripping with superiority. Leading them in was Tyler Hayes, the spoiled son of one of the state's richest businessmen, handsome, entitled, and used to the world bowing at his feet. They commandeered a booth by the window, snapping their fingers at Emily as if she wasn't there. She greeted them with the same soft courtesy she lent everyone else, smiled, took their order, and quietly went about her job. The Hell's Angels watched in silence from the counter. They'd seen this type before, kids who thought money could buy respect. By the time Emily returned with their food, expertly balancing steaming plates in both hands, Tyler was wrinkling his nose in disgust. "This looks like garbage," he sneered, loud enough for all to hear. His friends burst out laughing. The smile on Emily's lips faltered, yet she maintained her composure. "I apologize, sir," she whispered. "I can make you another one if you like." Tyler leaned back in his seat, smirking. Then, to impress his friends, he spat on her apron. The diner fell absolutely silent. Even the jukebox seemed to have stopped mid-song. Emily froze, her hands trembling as she wiped her apron. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she just whispered and could barely hold her voice steady. "I'm sorry, sir." Her dignity wasn't broken, but the quiet humiliation in her eyes was enough to make the whole room ache. At the counter, the Hell's Angels exchanged silent glances. Their leader, Rick Bear Lawson, a towering man with a salt and pepper beard and thunder in his eyes, pushed back his chair. The scratching of its legs against the floor cut through the diner like a warning. One after another, each biker stood behind him. The floor seemed to shake under their boots as they started walking toward Tyler's table, calm, steady, and deadly silent. The cocky grin on Tyler's face quickly disappeared when the shadow of Bear fell over him. Bear didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You think money makes you better than her?" he said in a low, sharp tone. "That girl works harder in one day than you've worked in your whole life." Nervously, Tyler laughed, though confidence was quickly deserting him. Bear leaned in, his eyes fixed on him. "You just disrespected someone we respect," he said firmly. "You're going to make this right." Outside, the roar of 50 Harley engines fired up as one, a deep, thunderous sound that shook the ground and heart in equal measure. Everyone in the diner stood and watched as Tyler and his friends were escorted quietly outside, surrounded by a wall of leather and loyalty. No one touched them, but the message was not hard to decipher. Bear stood tall and composed, his eyes looking directly into Tyler's. "You'll be back here tomorrow," he said in a voice that left no room for argument. "Not as customers, but as workers. You're going to clean, serve, and learn what respect really means." And that's exactly what happened. The next morning, the roar of engines was replaced by the clatter of dishes and the hiss of soapy water. Under Emily's quiet supervision, Tyler and his friends had spent the whole day scrubbing tables, taking orders, and washing dishes. First, Tyler was angry, embarrassed. He felt the bikers were humiliating him. But as the days went by, something inside him began to shift. He saw the way that Emily worked, how she smiled, though exhaustion shadowed her eyes, how she treated people with respect, whether they wore leather jackets or $1,000 suits. Her kindness wasn't an act, that's just who she was. And for the first time, Tyler began to see the difference in power and strength, in arrogance and in grace. One night, after the diner had closed, and the neon sign flickered quietly in the window. Tyler walked outside and saw Emily sitting on the steps, gazing up at the stars. He sat down next to her. For a long time, neither spoke. The night was silent. Sometimes silence says more than words can. Then he whispered in a shaky breath, "I'm sorry." It wasn't the kind of apology to come from guilt or fear. It came from understanding, finally realizing how wrong he had been. The next morning, Tyler returned. This time, he wasn't empty-handed. He had an envelope in his hand and laid it carefully on the counter in front of Emily. Inside was a check, large enough to cover her father's medical bills in full. He looked at her and said softly, "This doesn't erase what I did, but maybe it can help a little." Emily's eyes welled up with tears. She did not say a word because she did not need to. Instead, she smiled, a small, trembling smile that carried forgiveness and gratitude all at once. The Hells Angels watched the whole exchange from their corner booth. They didn't get involved. They just smiled because they'd seen a lot of fights in their lives. But watching a young man's heart change, that was something far rarer. Word went out around town about the arrogant rich kid who had disrespected a waitress, and how 50 Hells Angels taught him what respect was all about. Months later, Tyler still came to the diner, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. He even started volunteering at a youth shelter, helping kids who had nothing, maybe because he finally realized what it meant to have something that mattered. As for Emily, life took a beautiful turn. She finally opened her own cafe, cozy with warm lights and an even warmer message. She called it Second Chances Cafe. On one wall, she hung a framed photo, her standing proudly beside the Hells Angels, all smiling. Beneath it, in bold black letters, a quote read, "Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Real Kindness Stories. Help us spread messages that remind the world that compassion, humility, and respect still matter. And before this story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Emily's place? Would you have remained silent or stood tall like she did with quiet dignity that changed someone's life forever? Sometimes, it doesn't take any amount of money, power, or strength to change the world. It only takes one brave soul who refuses to stop being kind.